of October, 3 days ago, 59 years ago, 3 days back, Srila Prabhupada took a flock out of 26 Second Avenue for the first time. Now, in those days, Prabhupada called them boys, the boys. They were all young, 20s, when I was 20, but many years later. When Srila Prabhupada arrived in New York in 1965, I was 7, so I couldn't join. But I've been very fortunate to live through his life by working on Lilamrita and helping and studying. So Prabhupada took his flock out only 6 months after the International Society was founded. 1966, of course, I'll back up for a second. Srila Prabhupada arrived September 19th, 1965. On a side note, 2 very senior disciples, you all know, remember Hayagriva and Kirtan. I found this very interesting that 10 days after Prabhupada arrived, they got on a boat and went to India looking for a guru. It's just a very unusual twist of fate. So they left, but Prabhupada started, met Satsvarup, Mukunda, Jadharani, Brahmananda, Gargamuni, all the names that we now know, senior devotees, Malati, Guru Das, Janaki, Shama Sundar. I'm going to tell a Shama Sundar story. This is the best ever. So Prabhupada took the flock out of 22nd Avenue. Remember, Hare Krishna movement in those days was an anomaly to the street people. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know anything. Even the devotees weren't so sure. What are we doing? We're in the temple, 22nd Avenue. Have anyone been to 22nd Avenue? Mall, right? Little place. Which another story on how Mukunda found that. But so they only chanted in the temple. So Prabhupada said, we're going out. They were like, what? And I heard this from Brahmananda. He was a friend, and we talked. I came to my house many times, and we were close. So they went out. Prabhupada's order. Hayagriva was carrying a huge drum, like a school drum. Kind of wild. All right, so they go to Tompkins Square Park. And even though we just did the same thing, Prabhupada was present, and a crowd gathered. Now, this is the first time, 59 years ago, the 9th of October, which is 3 days ago, 59 years ago. The New York Times sent out a reporter, and they took a photograph of that day. Now, we've seen this before, but putting it into perspective, first time ever the Mahamantra is chanted by Westerners in the presence of a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada in the streets of New York. So here is what Brahmananda remembered, and it's a good one. So the article was entitled, Swami's Flock Chants in the Park to Find Ecstasy. Pretty accurate, considering a Karmi reporter just grasped. Sitting under a tree in Lower East Side Park and occasionally dancing, 50 followers of Hindu Swami repeated a 16-word chant for 2 hours yesterday afternoon to the accompaniment of cymbals, tambourines, sticks, drums, bells, and a small reed organ. Nanda had a harmonium, but he pulled all the, he just pumped it. There was none of that. Brahmananda speaks now. Brahmananda remembered. The first dancing was in Tompkins Square Park. When Prabhupada sang in the park, that very first time, Achuchananda and I danced. Prabhupada had the kirtan for 3 hours, nonstop. He was singing. Now remember, Srila Prabhupada 70 by this time, soon to be 71. The New York Times, they came to that kirtan. They took a photograph of Achuchananda, myself, Prabhupada sitting there, and the caption, which we just read, Swami's flock finds ecstasy. Now here's the interesting part. Prabhupada later said, the Times of New York was the most important newspaper in the world. And he said, this article marked the beginning of my movement. So this is when the Hare Krishna movement, Prabhupada said, began, really, formally, officially. And what was it that separated the months prior to that day? Golokara Premadana, Harinam Sankirtana, by chanting in public for the first time. It's like coming to the world and being born. The Hare Krishna movement was born. Srila Prabhupada said that. So Lord Chaitanya taught us to share the mercy by giving it in public. It's hard, now the days are changed. Years have gone by, decades have gone by since when I joined. We were on the streets of Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia and making a show, a spectacle. It was part of our life. We made spectacle. And people wouldn't forget it, but it's not as much now. Maybe in Europe, there's a lot going on. So Srila Prabhupada arrives in 1965. He spent a whole year suffering in the coldest winter in the history of New York. Suffering. Well, not Prabhupada suffer, but you know what I mean. Austerity. One day in the future, someone asked Prabhupada, what was the hardest time you had coming to America? And Prabhupada didn't. He said, you don't want to know. So he didn't share it. But that was a tough year. He had nobody. So in 1966, he founded the Hare Krishna movement, officially ISKCON, ISKCON. Prabhupada named it that way for a reason, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. It was formulated in 1966. So now a couple months goes by, and in the whole year of 1966 until the summer of 67, when that took place, Prabhupada is teaching them like babies. No, don't do that. Yes, do that. Cook with this. No, you can't smoke cigarettes in the temple. No, you can't. All the things they didn't understand. They were hippies. And so Srila Prabhupada, now try to imagine this. He was 70. He cooked every Sunday feast himself for a year. Yes, maybe someone helped cut vegetables, all that. But Prabhupada couldn't trust him with this service, so he did it himself. A lot of people forget that. 70, cooking the whole feast. He set up to 200 people he was feeding. So again, these things that I read, I was fortunate because I would open the file cabinets, take something out, and just read all these original things. Those file cabinets, I don't know where they are, but there was, anyway. So Prabhupada did it for a year. Then the devotees started catching on. Now, it's 1966, September. The following year, on Memorial Day, 1 year later, September, Prabhupada has a heart attack. 2 years is all he was in America so far, has a heart attack. Severe. And he already had 2 heart attacks on the Jaladuta. So, speaking of heart attacks, Cleveland Clinic. Anyway, speaking of all that, so Srila Prabhupada thought maybe this was it. Now, I want you to all think for a second, what would have happened if Srila Prabhupada went back to India, which he did, and stayed or didn't come back? So he told the devotees in 26 Second Avenue and the devotees in the Haight-Ashbury, Mukunda, Yamuna, Guru, they all started a temple in Haight-Ashbury. Mantra Rock Dance, the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, all these people were friends of the devotees in Haight-Ashbury. So this was it. East Coast, West Coast. That was it. Prabhupada left. He thought maybe this was it. Now, I can't get into Prabhupada's mind, but he went back to Vrindavan. And for several months, Ramananda and others would try to do class. They never did it, ever. The whole time Prabhupada was in America, he gave classes. So when Prabhupada left, it was suddenly in the hands of the young men, the young 25-year-olds, to give a class, to cook a feast, to take care of the people who walk in the front door, and to keep things going. So Srila Prabhupada stayed in India, got better. And here's the part where you might realize that maybe Krishna gave Prabhupada that 10-year boost, 10-year extension. So Srila Prabhupada came back in 67, just at the end, and he lived in 77, November 14th, 77. So that's 10 years. And that's the whole growth of the Hare Krishna movement was really 10 years. Yes, we had 22nd Avenue and Haight-Ashbury and all that, but the Beatles, none of that. My Lord, Radha Krishna Temple, the Govinda prayers, none of that had happened yet. So another interesting story involving Kirtananda and Hayagriva, Prabhupada sent them to London, and they came back. I don't know how long they were there, but they failed. They didn't succeed. Nobody would listen. They couldn't preach, so they gave up, came back. So Srila Prabhupada sent the same 6 devotees who went to Haight-Ashbury, Yamuna, Mukunda, Janaki, Malati, Guru Das, if I'm missing anyone, and he said they wanted to go to London. So they were called, they had a nickname, it was like the Fabulous Six. Does anyone remember the nickname? So they had a nickname in the movement because they had done this amazing Haight-Ashbury. Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, appeared with Prabhupada at the Mantra Rock Dance. And big things happened in California. Golden Gate Park, Rath Yatras began first on a truck, just a truck with a flatbed. Jayananda was the creator. Another story is Jayananda's 10-year Prabhupada. I won't get into that one, but that's a good one. So, Srila Prabhupada comes back, sends those 6 to London. And London had a circuit of singers and some transcendentalists going on. So it was kind of like the scene. So Mukunda being a musician and Yamuna being the singer, they started singing in the local network around London. At some point, Shama Sundar goes to Apple Records, sits in the back in full dhoti, shaven head. Actually, let me back up. They had a meeting in Istagosti. Mukunda, Yamuna, all them, they had a meeting and said, we need to get some help, some power. Let's get the Beatles involved. They actually discussed this. So Shama Sundar was nominated, and he just said, I got to shave my head. He had hair. He didn't want to shave his head. It was a hippie day. So he gave in. Shama Sundar shaved his head, put on the dhoti, all pucka, goes down to Apple Records. And in those days, they had the people around outside waiting for the Beatles. They're called Apple Scruffs. So he went in, sat in the back, didn't make a scene, just quietly chanted on his beads. I think it was the 3rd day or 2nd day that he did that. And George Harrison opens the door to the studio, sees Shama Sundar, and he walks out and walks up to him and says, where have you been? I've been looking for you guys. Apparently, George Harrison had gotten the Radha Krishna album, which they had previously made from their little circuit around London, and he was listening to it and listening to it and listening to it, and he was like drawn. So he pulled Shama Sundar in. They became friends. And Shama Sundar goes back to the devotees and says, George Harrison, we met him. So they decide, they're kind of like working it. They start sending food, all kinds of wonderful food to Apple Records. It wasn't an accident. They planned it. So they cooked up halwa, sabji, whatever, and sent it all down to Apple Records. So the first day, 2nd day, and then it became a hit. Next thing you know, the staff, the engineers in the studio reading, but the Beatles hadn't come out yet. And then one day, John Lennon and Paul McCartney tries to promote them. Next thing you know, they're addicted. And now it becomes a regular, expected thing. The devotees are cooking for the Beatles. Okay. So George Harrison becomes more and more friendly. Shama Sundar and George Harrison eventually become like closest brothers. As a matter of fact, Shama Sundar was there when George Harrison left his body years later, 2001. So there's a bond developing, and here's a great story. It's a Shama Sundar story. Prabhupada got Bori Place going. Bori Place was a little brownstone kind of building in the middle of London. And Shama Sundar was a handyman, and he would build things. He was building the interior of Bori Place. They gutted it, 3 floors. Devotees didn't even get a permit. They just did it. They knocked all the floors out. And in the process of building, they needed money for a big iron beam, like that beam right there, like that. So Shama Sundar goes down to where the Beatles are hanging out, and he sees Mick Jagger. And he asked Mick Jagger, will you help? Now, in those days, the Beatles, the Hare Krishnas were becoming a happening. Their album was called Happening. So it was a thing. So Mick Jagger says to Shamana Sundar, yeah, go ahead, go to my secretary, get some money. So surprisingly, the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger paid for the $10,000 beam that held the temple floors up of the deities. I didn't know that. So I used to think they were singers, evil singers, you know what I mean, sympathy for the devil and all. But actually, he did something significant, and it's described in the Purana that anyone who donates or helps build a temple in this world, Krishna will build a temple in Loka Vrindavan. And for every molecule in the stone that you build a temple for Krishna, you will spend 1,000 years in Svarga Loka, something like that. So I was impressed, Mick Jagger. Okay. So Prabhupada is translating. Remember, in those days, there were no books except the 3 volumes he brought from India, and he started working on Krishna book. Now, why did Srila Prabhupada jump from the 1st canto all the way to the 10th canto? Because that heart attack gave him warning, gave him notice that. So he wanted the devotees to have Krishna book very quickly before anything might happen. So he skipped all the way to the 10th canto and translated Krishna book. But he didn't have anybody to pay for the publishing. So, Shama Sundar, come here, Prabhupada calls him. Shama Sundar had just gotten $10,000 from George Harrison for a new marble slab for the Puri temple. He'd just given it. So Prabhupada said to George, Shama Sundar, can you go back and see George and ask him for $100,000 to help us print, maybe $200,000 to help us print Krishna book? Now Shama Sundar was like, huh? And you can see it on YouTube. If you Google this, you'll see Shama Sundar tell the story himself. But he said he was like, we just got money from him, but he had to do what Prabhupada said. So he got on the next morning, he got on the public transportation, went out to where George Harrison was, and met him. Didn't want to ask him for the money at first. All day he avoided the topic, to hang out with George Harrison. I think Eric Clapton came by and they were having lunch. You know, it's kind of like Shama Sundar is one of the gang now. He's not a singer, but they liked him, and he's a humble guy. If you ever met Shama Sundar, he's really sweet. So it's late. He still hasn't asked and fulfilled Prabhupada's request. So Shama Sundar is thinking, I got to do this, so I might as well do it now. So George Harrison's sitting here. Shama Sundar's here. Everyone had left. It was the end of the day. They both had to leave. So he said, George, Srila Prabhupada asks me to ask you if you would donate for the new Krishna book. And Shama Sundar tells very carefully, he says, George's face turned a little bit unpleasant because Shama Sundar said, George might have been thinking, oh, they're asking me for more money. Here it goes, you know. So they were sitting there after he asked George Harrison, and there was silence. Suddenly, the house got hit by lightning. The power went out. And George and Shama Sundar are sitting in the dark, and the storm is outside suddenly. Is that a sign or what? So the lights come back on or something, a few minutes, and George said, okay, I'll do it. True story. See for yourself. Go to YouTube. Now, I call this, I don't call it, Brahmananda once told me that everything about Srila Prabhupada, there were little miracles. Little miracles would occur. Couldn't explain it any other way. Little miracles, like that one. How could a bolt of lightning hit his house? Not down the street and knock the power out, which we all know. It hit the house. The house shook like an earthquake. And George was, I guess he realized that was Lord Indra saying, give it. So Krishna book money was received. Of course, we all know George Harrison later gave Bhakti Manor. Can you imagine that? How dear he was. Some years later, skipping forward, George Harrison asked Srila Prabhupada, should I shave my head and I want to join? Prabhupada said, and he said, you are talented and you are influencing so many. Just what you do. Continue doing what you're doing. But Prabhupada had him sit down. He opened up the songbook, Vaishnava songbook, and started sharing with him Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs, the themes, the mood, the way. And so George Harrison got from Prabhupada a mission to take some of the sentiment from the songbook and put it in Western. And then there we see My Sweet Lord, Here Comes the Sun. Other songs were directly about Srila Prabhupada or Krishna. So, changed to 1970. I'm in Philadelphia as a kid. AM radios are playing on the streets. I hear this song, My Sweet Lord, Hare. And I'm hearing it, and I'm just, what is that? What is that chanting? I think it was 11 or 12, 1970, I'm about 12. And I heard it, and I'll never forget it. Came through the AM radio, just like all the other nonsense. And it stuck in my mind for my whole life. So that chanting changed the world through the George Harrison. So then Yamuna tells the story after the Beatles released My Sweet Lord and, of course, the Radha Krishna Temple album, which they produced. They were in the temple, they were in Abbey Road. Yamuna and the others were in Abbey Road Studios singing. Nobody was recording, so they just grabbed some instruments and they were singing. Kind of like what we were doing, but Yamuna was leading, and George Harrison walked in and heard her. And just like that, he said, let's make an album. Now, the Radha Krishna Temple album's already been published. It's already sold. It already went to #1 or close on the local circuit in England. That's the, well, you can look it up. That's a different thing. So then George Harrison starts producing the Govinda prayers. Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Yamuna sings, George Harrison does the mixing, and Paul McCartney comes in, and he takes over the mixing, and George Harrison gets on the bass guitar, and the next thing you know, 3 Beatles are in the Govinda prayers. And Eric Clapton played guitar on the Govinda prayers. A lot of people don't know that. Put their name on it. They didn't take money for it. They just did it from devotion. So the Govinda prayers were recorded by George Harrison and Paul McCartney, the world's top pop idols. Okay, so they record the album. It's all put together. They never checked with Srila Prabhupada. They never sent him a pre-copy. He didn't know. So they sent the album over to America. Srila Prabhupada is in L.A. The L.A. temple had only one sound system. They couldn't just put a record in Prabhupada's room and play it privately. So they decided to play it on the temple speakers, big speakers. It's the first time ever. So the morning program, it's almost greeting the deities. So I don't know who thought of it, but they decided to play it during greeting the deities. Srila Prabhupada had never heard it. He's sitting right there. Dun, 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 dun. Starts. Curtains open. Incense is billowing out. Srila Prabhupada is listening to the Govinda prayers. First time. Tears come down his face. So Srila Prabhupada said, this is from Goloka Vrindavan. And he made that Govinda prayers official in every temple from that day forth. So how is Krishna working? Through all these hidden ways to forward this movement so that we have it all. Srila Prabhupada gave it all. Right now, if you go online, and you type in there Vanipedia, you can see everything Prabhupada ever said, everything categorized, every quote, every picture, every lecture. Unbelievable. It's so vast. But back then, Prabhupada was it. He carried everything within him. And wherever he went, devotees would flock. So he was the personification of the Hare Krishna movement. So I'm going to lead into another story that happened in London. Is this okay, timing? So the Govinda prayers becomes official. We thank George Harrison, Paul, and all that for what they did, because that is a beautiful prayer. It's Stunning prayer. So in one kirtan in London, Yamuna tells the story, and you can, again, hear it on YouTube, which everything's amazing now. She says that she was leading the kirtan in the London temple. Prabhupada was sitting behind her. Devotees were having a wonderful time singing. And the kirtan was starting to pick up the pace. And there was something, energy developing. She said it was a magical moment suddenly happened. And all of a sudden, during this magical moment, when something happened, Prabhupada yelled, Narada Muni, Bajaya Vina, Radha Ramana Name. Prabhupada yelled it. I'm not doing it the same as Prabhupada. She said Prabhupada yelled it. Narada Muni had appeared in the assembly of devotees up in the air, apparently. We couldn't see it. So Srila Prabhupada began chanting the Narada Muni prayers. He told Yamuna, keep singing, keep singing. She kept singing, didn't know what was going on, kept singing. And she said that something in that kirtan happened, and they were lifted off their feet. They were jumping in the air 2 feet. And she wasn't exaggerating. They were jumping in the air. She said her baby, Saraswati, jumped 2 feet in the air, a 2-year-old baby. So what could this be? Well, if Narada Muni, the transcendental traveler of the universe, was there, what does the Narada Muni prayer mean when you translate it? Narada Muni, Bajaya Vina. When Narada Muni plays his Veena, the holy name of Radha Raman descends. So he didn't say Krishna descends, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He said the holy name of Radhika Raman descends, which means the holy name is non-different than the Supreme Lord himself. Radhika Raman Namde. So Radhika Raman, Krishna had descended right then and there, the spiritual world, in the form of Narada Muni's Veena and the chanting of the holy names. And Narada Muni was there. Another time Prabhupada said Lord Brahma was there. Now this one happened in London, so after that event, Srila Prabhupada instructed the London devotees to put a little asana for Narada Muni on the altar, and it's still there. So it's just sitting there where so Narada Muni can come and sit. It happened. Now, the next day, Yamuna asked Prabhupada, what happened? And Prabhupada said, oh, you didn't see? Narada Muni was there. Oh, you didn't see? Well, no, we didn't see because we're not on that level, but what a story. And it happened another time in Berkeley. In Berkeley, I lived there for a while. I was a VP there for a little bit. I was 4 or 5 years after Prabhupada, I was there. So the story was there were a bunch of reporters in the room. Prabhupada was answering questions. And somehow he said again, Narada Muni. And he said to the devotees, Narada Muni is there. He had come at that moment in the Berkeley temple as well. And again, you can see all these stories are under the Remembering Srila Prabhupada series on YouTube. You can go see them and hear them from the devotees who were sitting there and witnessed it. So these are wonderful things that we can't understand, but Brahmananda called these the magical moments. Srila Prabhupada, it always happened, magical, something about Srila Prabhupada. One more magical moment. Is that okay? So Brahmananda is sitting in 26 Second Avenue. Prabhupada had finished the Bhagavad Gita translations. He had sent Hayagriva to a publisher to see about getting it published. This is before the Govinda prayers and all that was back in. I skipped ahead, so I'll back up. So Hayagriva failed. He couldn't find any interest. Now Hayagriva was a professor. He was an English professor. He had clout. Nobody was interested, so he gave up. He sent another devotee, got his name, and then he gave up. No publishers in New York were interested in Bhagavad Gita. So then some time goes by. An order came to the 26 Second Avenue. Remember, 26 Second Avenue was the headquarters at that time. An order came for, I think, some album from the Radha Krishna London devotees. Something came in from Macmillan House Publishing, an order for like 6 albums. So Brahmananda got the order. He was temple president, so he took care of all the business. So the letter came, he opened it, said Macmillan House. So he goes up to Prabhupada on the 2nd floor, back in the back there. And Prabhupada said, Macmillan House, go tomorrow and ask them if they would publish Bhagavad Gita or wanted to publish Bhagavad Gita. And Brahmananda, why would I? I have no connections. I've never been up New York, up, what's it called, up the city. They got the north, uptown. I'm not a New Yorker. Brahmananda says in his story when he's telling you, I've never been up there. I don't know these people, but I follow Prabhupada's instruction. So he took the albums that they ordered. He asked Prabhupada, should I take a copy of the Bhagavad Gita with me? Prabhupada said, no. Now, you got to ask yourself, what does Prabhupada know that Brahmananda doesn't? So Brahmananda gets on the public transportation, goes up to uptown New York, goes to Macmillan House, goes in, sits down. Receptionist is indifferent, takes care of the business, gives the album, whatever it was. He said, is anyone here I could talk to about publishing? No answer. It was kind of like no interest. Just take your check and go. And the door opens. And in the door, an executive stuck his head in at the same moment Brahmananda was sitting there and started talking to the secretary. And I don't know how, but Brahmananda said, are you a publisher? Are you the head publisher? Yes. I have a Swami that wants to publish Bhagavad Gita. Are you interested? Of all the answers you would expect, he said, are you kidding? I need it for my catalog. We need Indian literature. We need a Bhagavad Gita. You have one? He said, yes. He said, who is it written by? Swami Prabhupada. And he's here in New York right now. And this publisher was like, are you kidding? I need that. It's like Prabhupada knew. So Brahmananda gets all the information, takes the bus back, runs up to Prabhupada and tells him they're interested in publishing. Now, Brahmananda tells it like this. It's a miracle. Nothing else can explain it. Prabhupada knew. Prabhupada sent him. Prabhupada said, tell them, and it all fell into place. And that's how Bhagavad Gita was published by Macmillan House after multiple attempts by other devotees to get someone interested. So Srila Prabhupada did that. There's so many stories. Any questions? Anybody? I want to keep going on. How long do you go for, Prabhu? My wife will be upset. Let's see. I always love those stories. I'll think of one more. Yeah. Oh, he's too. Go ahead. I think you should take over now, Prabhupada. Thank you.